They say you never truly know a person until money is involved. I learned that the hard way on a freezing Christmas night, looking across a dining table at the sun I sacrificed everything to raise. He handed me a glossy brochure that shattered my heart, expecting me to quietly surrender my life, my home, and my dignity so he could buy his wife a beach house. He thought I was just a tired old woman who would cry and comply. But tomorrow morning he is going to find out that the millions he was banking on have completely vanished. My name is Maxine. I am 68 years old, and for over 3 decades I walked the halls as a high school principal, dealing with every kind of disrespect you can imagine. But nothing could have prepared me for the betrayal that happened in my own family. It was Christmas Eve, a night that is supposed to be filled with warmth and gratitude. Instead, the air outside was bitter cold, and the atmosphere inside my son Marcus' house was even colder. I had worn my best emerald green dress, carrying a homemade sweet potato pie that took me hours to bake. I walked through the heavy oak doors of a mansion that, if we are being completely honest, my life savings helped secure. I did not want applause. I just wanted the love of my only child. But as I took off my coat, a heavy, sinking feeling settled in my chest. This was not a celebration. It was an ambush. The dining room looked like a magazine cover, all gold-trimmed plates and towering crystal centerpieces. Marcus, who just turned 40 and carries himself like he owns the world, sat at the head of the table. Next to him was his wife Jasmine. She wore a tight, glittering dress and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Every time I tried to speak, Jasmine would interrupt, making sharp little comments about how my stories were out of date, or how my pie was too full of sugar for their strict diet. Across from me sat my sister-in-law, Rochelle. Rochelle and I have been through everything together. She kept catching my eye, giving me these tense, uncomfortable looks. We both felt it. The forced laughter, the clinking of expensive wine glasses that sounded more like warning bells. Marcus kept checking his watch, practically ignoring the memories I tried to share. They were rushing through the meal, treating me not as the matriarch of the family, but as an annoying guest who had overstayed her welcome. I gripped my linen napkin under the table, praying I was just imagining things. But the real nightmare was just about to begin. Looking around that lavish dining room, my mind drifted back to the days when Marcus was just a little boy running around in worn-out sneakers. His father, David, passed away suddenly from a massive heart attack when Marcus was only 10 years old. In a single terrifying instant, my entire world collapsed, leaving me completely alone to raise a grieving child on a single public school teacher salary. But I made a solemn, unbreakable promise to my late husband, right there at his gravesite. I promised him that our son would never want for anything, that he would have every possible opportunity in the world to succeed. I took that promise to heart, with every single fibre of my being. While other mothers were resting on the weekends or enjoying summer vacations, I was constantly picking up extra tutoring sessions and teaching endless summer school classes. I worked brutal double shifts until my feet swelled and my voice went completely hoarse. We ate cheap meals of beans and rice night after night, and I wore the exact same winter coat for 15 long years, just so I could put away every spare dollar into his growing college fund. When Marcus finally got accepted into an elite Ivy League business school, the tuition was absolutely astronomical. The bank tellers looked at me like I had lost my mind, but I did not hesitate for a single second. I took out massive personal loans, putting my own fragile financial security completely on the line, because I believed in him so deeply. I believed in us. I was raised with the unwavering conviction that family always protects family, no matter the personal cost. You give your children everything you have, and in return they honor you and ensure you are safe when your hair finally turns grey for so many years. Marcus was my ultimate pride and joy. I watched him walk proudly across that graduation stage with a prestigious degree that my blood, sweat, and tears had paid for, and I honestly thought all those endless, sleepless nights had finally paid off. I thought we had perfectly secured a beautiful, stable future together. I had given him the entire world, fully trusting that he would always remember the calloused hands that built his strong foundation. But immense success has a funny way of changing people. Or perhaps it simply reveals who they truly are deep down inside. As Marcus rapidly climbed the corporate ladder, securing high-level executive positions and bringing home massive bonuses, the sweet, grateful boy I raised began to completely disappear. He traded his natural compassion for a cold, calculating arrogance. The phone calls home became much shorter and far less frequent, usually ending with a rushed excuse about an urgent meeting. When he eventually married Jasmine, the emotional distance between us only grew significantly wider. Jasmine came from a background of old money and clearly viewed me as a lower-class relic from a past she desperately wanted Marcus to forget entirely. Together, they started treating me not as a respected matriarch who sacrificed everything, but as an outdated, tedious embarrassment that they had to tolerate. When I visited their pristine home, they would literally hide my framed family photos and actually apologize to their wealthy friends for my simple, honest way of speaking. Despite the growing, chilling coldness, my deeply ingrained belief in family loyalty completely blinded me to the harsh reality of their mounting greed. 3 years ago, I made the absolute biggest mistake of my entire life. I owned my historic family home completely free and clear. It was a beautiful, sprawling property in a highly desirable neighborhood that had been in my family for generations, fully paid off through decades of my grueling hard work. Marcus convincingly told me that I needed to protect this extremely valuable asset for my old age. He brought over a thick stack of complex legal papers and smoothly suggested I transfer the title of the house into a revocable family trust. He confidently assured me it was standard financial practice to avoid heavy taxes and complicated probate courts. He was named as the primary beneficiary and the active managing trustee. I signed the documents without a single second thought, completely trusting my own flesh and blood to ethically manage my estate and ensure I was comfortably taken care of in my golden years. I willingly handed over the keys to my kingdom to a son who was apparently already measuring the drapes for my funeral. I sat at that lavish Christmas table, completely unaware that the legal documents I signed out of pure, unconditional love were about to be brutally used as a weapon to completely destroy my entire life. The dinner plates had been cleared, and the heavy silence in the room was suffocating. Marcus tapped his silver spoon against his crystal glass, standing up with that polished executive smile he used to close business deals. I looked up at him foolishly, hoping this was the moment he would finally express some gratitude for our family, maybe even acknowledge the sacrifices that brought him to this very head of the table. Instead, he reached into his tailored jacket pocket and pulled out a glossy, cheaply printed pamphlet. He walked over to my chair and placed it face down next to my coffee cup. I flipped it over slowly. The bold letters across the top read Sunset Pines Assisted Living. A cold wave washed over my entire body. Sunset Pines was a notoriously run-down state-funded facility on the far edge of town, known for its neglect and terrible conditions. I looked up at my son, completely confused. Marcus cleared his throat loudly, making sure everyone at the table was watching me. He adopted a patronizing, overly gentle tone that felt like a sharp slap to the face. "Mother," he began, his voice echoing in the quiet dining room. "Jasmine and I have been talking, and we feel that living alone in that big old house is simply becoming too much of a burden for you. You are getting older, and quite frankly, you are becoming a burden on us as well. We worry about your safety." My heart stopped beating in my chest. Before I could even form a single word, Jasmine leaned forward, her diamond earrings catching the chandelier light. "It is really for the best, Maxine," she chimed in, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Plus, Marcus and I have been looking at a stunning beachfront property down in Miami for our winter vacations. Maintaining your outdated house is draining our resources, and selling it now is the most logical financial step for our growing portfolio." The room began to spin. In front of my sister-in-law, Rochelle, and all their pretentious guests, my only child was casually announcing his plan to throw me into a dismal institution so his wife could have a vacation house. The humiliation burned my cheeks like fire. I sat frozen in my chair, staring at the glossy brochure, unable to process the sheer cruelty of the boy I had given my life to raise. He told everyone that the decision was already finalized and that it was a purely practical matter. The audacity of his words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I pushed my chair back from the table, my hands shaking so violently I had to grip the wooden armrests to steady myself. I muttered a quiet excuse about needing to use the restroom and practically fled down the long carpeted hallway toward the guest bedroom. Once inside, I closed the door, pressing my back against the cool wood, gasping for air as the first hot tears began to spill down my cheeks. I felt like I was suffocating in that massive house. But my moment of private grief was abruptly shattered. The guest room shared a thin wall with Marcus' study, and the heavy oak door connecting the two rooms was slightly cracked open. I heard footsteps entering the study, followed by the clinking of glasses and a low, cruel laugh that I immediately recognized as Jasmine. I held my breath and crept closer to the cracked door. "Can you believe she actually thought the trust was just for tax purposes?" Jasmine sneered, her voice completely devoid of the fake sweetness she used at the dinner table. She signed away the entire deed without even reading the fine print. Marcus chuckled a cold, calculating sound that made my blood run absolutely freezing cold. "It was almost too easy," he replied smoothly. "The old woman is so blinded by family loyalty, she practically handed me the keys. Now we control the trust entirely." Jasmine sighed happily, talking about the ocean views from their new Miami property. "But what if she refuses to leave the house?" Jasmine asked. "What if she fights back?" I pressed my hand over my mouth to stifle a sob as Marcus laid out his ruthless plan. He told his wife not to worry. He explained a legal loophole he had found with his corporate lawyers. He said that since I was getting older, they would easily file paperwork to declare me mentally incompetent. Once they gained full medical and financial power of attorney, they would completely seize my teacher pension to cover their own expenses and have me legally evicted by a sheriff on New Year's Day. He laughed again, calling me a naive old fool who had outlived her usefulness. They were not just stealing my home. They were plotting to erase my entire existence. I backed away from the door, my legs trembling so badly I had to sink down onto the edge of the guest bed. For a few agonizing minutes, the crushing weight of a mother-broken heart threatened to completely destroy me. I thought about the double shifts, the cheap meals, the 15-year-old winter coat. I thought about the profound love I had poured into my son every single day of his life, only to realize he viewed me as nothing more than a stepping stone to his own wealth. But then something miraculous happened deep inside my soul. The overwhelming wave of crushing sorrow suddenly stopped. In its place, a burning, fierce heat began to rise in my chest. The tears drying on my face were the very last tears I would ever shed for Marcus. The profound pain of his ultimate betrayal slowly hardened into a cold, unbreakable, and terrifyingly sharp clarity. I realized with absolute certainty that my boundless, unconditional love had been weaponized against me by the very person I was trying to protect. I stood up from the bed and walked over to the ornate mirror hanging above the dresser. I looked closely at the reflection of the 68-year-old woman staring back at me. I saw the deep lines of hardship on my face, but I also saw the undeniable strength of a woman who had survived far worse storms than a greedy, ungrateful child. I was a respected principal who had disciplined thousands of unruly teenagers. I was a widow who had survived the darkest days of grief. I refused to let my own son discard me like useless garbage. I reached up and carefully smoothed down my hair, wiping away any remaining trace of weakness from my eyes. I took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the undeniable power of righteous anger filling my lungs. They thought they had outsmarted a naive old woman. They thought they had completely broken my spirit, but they were about to learn a devastating lesson about what happens when you back a strong mother into a corner. I was done being a victim. I did not march back into the dining room. I did not scream or throw the fine china against the expensive wallpaper. That is what they expected a weak and emotional woman to do. Instead, I walked quietly to the front hall closet. I retrieved my heavy winter coat and carefully slipped my arms into the sleeves. I found my small overnight bag tucked in the corner. Every movement I made was deliberate and completely silent. The house was filled with the muffled sounds of clinking glasses and arrogant laughter drifting from the study, but I felt entirely detached from it all. I opened the massive oak front door and stepped out into the freezing Christmas night. The bitter wind immediately whipped against my face, but the cold felt incredibly grounding. I walked down the long paved driveway, leaving only a solitary set of footprints in the fresh white snow. I did not look back at the glowing windows of the mansion that my own blood, sweat, and tears had helped build. I simply walked into the silent darkness of the neighborhood, feeling a strange sense of absolute freedom. Back inside that house, Marcus and Jasmine were likely still toasting to their brilliant deception, completely unaware that their greatest obstacle had just silently removed herself from their immediate reach. They thought my sudden absence was a sign of total defeat. They assumed I had retreated in shame, unable to face my own uselessness. By the time they realized I was gone, leaving nothing but an empty guest room and a chilling silence in my wake, it would be far too late for them to stop the hurricane that was already gathering strength. I hailed a passing taxi, letting the heater warm my frozen hands. The real war had just begun. The taxi left me across town. Warm lights shone through the kitchen window. Rochelle quickly answered my knock. She had left the dinner early and unsettled. Seeing me clutching my bag on the snowy porch, she pulled me inside without questions. She sat me at her kitchen table, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and poured me hot tea. I did not waste any time crying. I looked directly into Rochelle's eyes and told her everything I had heard in that study. I told her about the vile plan to declare me incompetent and steal my pension. Rochelle's face hardened into stone, her jaw clenching with pure outrage. She handed me her personal cell phone and pushed it across the table. It was almost midnight, but I dialed the personal emergency number for Jamal. Jamal was a brilliant Black American lawyer who had handled our family estate matters for nearly 20 years. He was not just a legal professional. He was a trusted friend who knew my late husband and respected our family legacy. Jamal answered on the third ring, his voice groggy but alert. I apologized for the late hour, but told him I had an absolute emergency regarding the family trust. I spoke with complete clarity and clinical precision, outlining the exact conversation I had overheard. Jamal listened silently as I described my son's ruthless plot to forcefully evict me by New Year's Day and seize my life savings. When I finally finished speaking, the line was quiet for a long moment before Jamal let out a heavy sigh. He told me he was profoundly sorry I had to experience such cruelty from my own child. But then his tone shifted from sympathetic to sharply professional. He asked me a very specific legal question about the paperwork Marcus had filed. He asked if the trust was revocable. I told him I remembered Marcus saying it was a revocable family trust just to avoid taxes. I heard Jamal chuckle softly over the phone, a sound of deep legal satisfaction. He told me Marcus had made a catastrophic, arrogant mistake. Because the trust was revocable, I still held the ultimate power to dissolve it entirely without needing my son's permission. I told Jamal I wanted to completely dismantle the trust, reclaim my deed, and rewrite my will by morning. Jamal promised we would begin the legal counterattack immediately, right now. The next few days became a continuous blur of strategic legal maneuvering. I practically lived in Jamal's downtown office, reviewing towering stacks of complex documents, while Rochelle brought us coffee and quiet encouragement. The very first step was executing the dissolution of the family trust. Marcus had been so unbelievably blinded by his own towering greed and arrogance that he completely overlooked the basic fundamental definition of a revocable trust. He assumed that because he was the acting trustee managing the finances, I was permanently locked out of my own assets. He was entirely wrong. With Jamal guiding every stroke of my pen, I legally revoked the trust agreement, terminating my son's authority over my estate in a matter of minutes. The historic family home, the solid property that my late husband and I had poured our entire lives into, instantly transferred right back into my sole legal possession. I signed a brand new deed, ensuring that Marcus' name was completely wiped from the historical property records. But we did not stop there. The deeper Jamal dug into the complicated financial records tied to the dissolved trust, the more horrifying the truth became. We uncovered a massive secret. Marcus had quietly leveraged my fully paid-off home, using the property as the primary collateral to secure a massive, highly risky commercial business loan for his failing investment firm. He had forged the supplementary authorization documents, completely betting my shelter on his reckless corporate gambles. If his investments crashed, the bank would have legally foreclosed on my house and thrown me onto the street, regardless of his nursing home plans. Discovering this secondary betrayal extinguished any lingering shred of maternal guilt I might have still harbored. I instructed Jamal to immediately draft a completely new last will and testament. I formally disinherited my only child, removing his name from every single financial account, insurance policy, and family heirloom. I made sure there were absolutely no remaining legal loopholes that could ever be exploited in probate court. Every asset I owned was tightly secured and legally locked away from his greedy hands. My entire estate was meticulously fortified. By the time the icy sun set on the third day of our intensive legal work, the massive shift in power was entirely finalized. Marcus thought he held all the winning cards, but I had quietly flipped the entire board. The trap was set. While I was busy dismantling his fraudulent empire, Marcus was aggressively trying to hunt me down. My personal cell phone buzzed endlessly with frantic incoming calls and increasingly angry voicemails. In his first few messages, he used a condescending tone, acting like I was a confused elderly woman who wandered off into the snow by accident. By the second day, his voice grew sharp and demanding, ordering me to return to his house immediately so we could finalize the nursing home transfer papers. I did not answer a single call. I listened to his growing panic with absolute cold detachment. I simply let the electronic voicemail box fill up, deleting the hateful recordings one by one. I refused to engage with a man who no longer deserved the privilege of hearing my voice. Instead of a tearful mother, Marcus received a crisp, professionally couriered letter delivered directly to his corporate office. The heavy envelope bore the intimidating gold seal of Jamal's prestigious downtown law firm. Inside the envelope was a formal, legally binding invitation mandating his attendance at an urgent estate finalization meeting. The meeting was scheduled for 3 o'clock in the afternoon on New Year's Eve. The letter offered absolutely no further explanation. It simply demanded his presence to formally resolve the outstanding family trust matters. I knew exactly how his greedy mind would interpret that vague phrasing. He would assume I had finally surrendered to his pressure. He would believe that I had hired my lawyer to peacefully hand over the keys and surrender my assets. When New Year's Eve finally arrived, I sat silently at the long mahogany table in Jamal's boardroom. The heavy glass doors swung open and Marcus walked in looking incredibly smug. He had no idea. He was about to lose everything. Today. Marcus strode into the boardroom with the confident swagger of a man who believed he had already won everything. He was wearing a custom-tailored suit and carrying a leather briefcase, smiling a sickeningly sweet smile as he pulled out a heavy chair directly across from me. Jasmine trailed closely behind him, practically vibrating with eager anticipation of her new beachfront property. I sat perfectly still, keeping my hands folded tightly, resting on the cool mahogany table. My face was completely devoid of any emotion. I did not offer a greeting. I did not blink. Jamal stood tall at the head of the table, radiating quiet, unyielding authority. Marcus immediately leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished wood, and casually asked where he needed to sign to finalize the transfer of the property and my medical power of attorney. He actually had the audacity to call me Mum in that same patronizing tone he used at Christmas dinner. Jamal did not return his confident smile. Instead, he calmly opened a thick manila folder and slid a single crisp legal document across the heavy table. Jamal informed Marcus in a flat, professional voice that the revocable family trust had been legally and permanently dissolved 3 days ago. Marcus completely froze, his arrogant smile faltering slightly as his eyes darted rapidly down to the paper. Jasmine gasped loudly, leaning over his shoulder to read the bold print. Jamal continued explaining that the deed to the historic family home had reverted entirely back to my name. But that was only the beginning of his nightmare. Jamal then handed Marcus a second heavily stamped document. It was a finalized, irrevocable deed of gift. Jamal looked directly into my son's shocked eyes and explained the ultimate devastating twist. I had not simply removed Marcus from my last will and testament. I had legally and irrevocably donated the entire $1.5 million estate to a local educational foundation. The historic property would be liquidated to fund full college scholarships for underprivileged Black youth in our city. The very same youth I had dedicated my entire life to teaching. The wealth my husband and I had built would go toward lifting up deserving children who actually respected the hard sacrifices made for them. The absolute silence in the room was deafening as Marcus slowly realized that the massive inheritance he had plotted to steal was completely gone forever. perfectly secured in an unbreakable charitable trust. Before Marcus could even open his mouth to protest the loss of his inheritance, Jamal delivered the second catastrophic blow. Jamal folded his hands deliberately and looked at my son with utter professional disdain. He informed Marcus that during our extensive review of the dissolved trust, we discovered the massive secret commercial business loan. The color instantly drained completely from Marcus' face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. Jasmine let out a sharp, confused cry, demanding to know exactly what loan Jamal was talking about. Marcus had apparently hidden his massive corporate debts from his own wife. Jamal clearly explained that because the family trust was officially terminated and the underlying property had been legally transferred to a charitable foundation, the massive bank loan Marcus had secretly secured using my home as collateral was now entirely unsecured. Jamal pulled out a formal notification letter from the regional bank and slid it toward my son, trembling hands. The bank was officially calling in the massive fraudulent loan immediately due to a severe breach of contract. Marcus and Jasmine were facing absolute total financial ruin. They had less than 30 days to produce hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash, or the bank would aggressively seize all of their personal assets, including their lavish mansion, their luxury cars, and their expensive investment portfolios. The polished, arrogant executive sitting across from me completely crumbled. The heavy realization of his total destruction hit him like a physical blow. Marcus violently pushed his chair back and fell to his knees right there on the expensive boardroom carpet. He grabbed the edge of the mahogany table, begging me with hot tears streaming down his face. He called me his beloved mother, apologizing frantically and pleading with me to reverse the donation to save him from devastating bankruptcy. Jasmine was openly weeping beside him. Her shallow dreams of a Miami vacation home shattered into a million worthless pieces. I looked down at the pathetic, desperate man, sobbing endlessly at my feet. I did not feel a single ounce of pity or regret. My broken heart remained as cold and hard as a diamond. I stood up slowly, smoothing my skirt and looking my son directly in the eye. I told him coldly that respect and loyalty are earned, not simply inherited by right. I told him he was finally getting exactly what he had worked so incredibly hard to earn. Absolutely nothing. I turned my back on his pathetic sobbing and walked purposefully out of the heavy glass doors of the boardroom. I did not look back. I rode the elevator down to the main lobby in complete silence, feeling lighter than I had in decades. When I pushed open the heavy front doors of the tall legal building, I stepped right out into the bright, crisp New Year's daylight. The cold winter air filled my lungs, but it did not bite. It felt incredibly refreshing and beautifully pure. Walking down that busy downtown sidewalk, I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of deep peace and complete liberation washing over my entire soul. I had successfully survived the ultimate betrayal and emerged much stronger than ever before. I was no longer just a tired mother tethered to an ungrateful son who only saw me as a temporary stepping stone to his own selfish wealth. I was a fiercely independent woman who had bravely protected her personal dignity and firmly secured her true family legacy forever. The long future stretched out brightly before me, entirely mine to define, and I was finally truly free. As mothers, we give our children roots and wings, but we must never let them clip ours in return. Respect is earned, not inherited. I had to learn the absolute hardest lesson of my entire life this year. Sometimes the only way to truly protect your own peace is to bravely walk away from the very people you created and nurtured. It is a deeply painful choice to make. You will cry, and you will grieve the relationship you thought you had. But taking that heavy step is absolutely necessary for your long-term survival and your personal dignity. You cannot pour love from an empty cup, and you cannot heal in the exact same environment that broke you. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members to protect your peace? I want to hear your stories and connect with you. Let me know in the comments below. Do not forget to tell me what state or country you are watching from today, and let me know if you watched all the way until the very end. Please like and subscribe for more stories of truth and justice.